Welcome everyone. It's Thursday, April 23rd, and you are logging into the Deeper Insights Tech Canada webinar series. You'll see on the screen some of the presenters that we have up and coming. Today we're going to have Jim Canfield talking to us about creating context in crisis. Tomorrow we have the pleasure of inviting back Jean McClellan. Jean is going to go through the Canadian Employee and Employer Assistance Programs, all of the current updates, all of the links and websites that you can go to, and proper preparation for accessing the funds that you and your employees might be requiring. On Monday, it is my special pleasure to invite Dr. Ryan Todd from the University of Calgary Psychiatry to talk to us about mental health and leading into the brave new workplace. He has some great apps. He's going to offer us some tips and some practical guidelines for keeping good mental health as we work through this time and as we prepare to return to the new workplace, what that's going to look like. So I would encourage you to join us. Please note that all of our webinars are open for everyone. So if you have anyone that would find value in any of our sessions, please feel free to invite them to the link and to have them join us. In addition, all of the recordings are available on the Tech Canada website. Just go to techcanada.com, click on COVID-19 Insights, and the drop down there will show you resources and webinars. Today our guest is Jim Canfield. Now, Jim Canfield is the Managing Director of CEO Tools. And CEO Tools provides winning strategies and business performance tools that empower CEOs to drive profitable growth. Jim brings a unique blend of past experience, including extensive learning in leadership theory and practice. Jim has often said he's been the been there, done that guy. So he brings that practical experience in running several companies back to us. It is also my pleasure to let you know that Jim was the 2019 Tech Canada Speaker of the Year. So without further ado, Jim, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ruth Ann. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I'll start some of my comments this way. We're moving quickly from a time where we've been asking the question, what happens now? You think how much has happened over the last few weeks. I mean, we're not even talking months yet. We're still talking weeks. And for those last weeks, we've been asking, what happens now? What happens now? We've been dealing with individual instances in our businesses, hourly, daily, weekly. And we're beginning to make a shift. There's a transition occurring. It'll be different for each business, each industry, but that shift is what happens next? What happens next? Where does it go from here? How is unfolding this situation that we're in going to occur? And you'll see it happen differently for different businesses, different industries, different geographies might see it, even different workforces. This morning, I'd like to talk about some thoughts around how we guide and lead in a situation that's fraught with crisis and chaos. And those are big words, you know, even a bit scary. And what I simply mean in crisis and chaos, crisis simply means it's happening to us and it's happening fast. And chaos means we don't have the answers for it. It feels out of order, out of sequence, out of sync, unusual, unknown, are all elements that we find. So as I tear those words apart, you start to see what I want to address. Well, there's one tool that I'd love to be able to give you this morning. It's probably the tool that we'd all like to have more than any other, and it's that crystal ball. It's that crystal ball that would help us answer the question, not only what's happening now and what do we do about that, but what happens next? Where's this thing going into the future? I'm a firm believer in the phrase that says, if you want to understand the future, create it. If you want to truly know the future, create it. And what that phrase is simply saying, it's been attributed to many executives in the past, and what it's simply saying is there might be a way to actually influence what happens to us in the future or with us in the future, or how we can control or at least influence the future, rather than just sitting idly by and seeing how it impacts us. This morning, I'd like to talk about three very specific areas. They're all communication related, that have to do with how to create this future for yourself, your team, your organization, your company, maybe even your industry as we move forward over the next few weeks, then months, and then through the rest of this year. I want to talk first about communication cadence. I want to talk about a reliable pattern of ongoing communication that, when delivered in a disciplined fashion, allows people to get more comfortable quickly. And the beauty of this is trust rises. You see, one of the things I've found is that trust and communication rise and fall together. Trust and communication rise and fall together. And if I'm in a situation where we need additional trust, and I think all of the aspects of today's situation require additional trust, then that requires us to increase the quality and the quantity of our communication. And doing that in a reliable pattern can establish a great deal of trust. People are uncertain, they're unsure. Your best people, I'm not talking about the people who maybe are a little further away from you, even your direct reports really don't know. And in a steady stream of a steady cadence of communication, we can begin to build this trust. I keep talking about trust. The Edelman Trust Barometer is the world's largest study on engagement. Are people engaged with us? Are they willing to give their time, energy, and effort for us to accomplish the goals and objectives we've laid out? Now, it's interesting, the survey is not called the Edelman Engagement Barometer, it's called the Edelman Trust Barometer. It's a study of over 33,000 employees every year. And the reason it's called the Edelman Trust Barometer is because they found trust and communication, trust and engagement have a one-to-one correlation. Simply put, I will not engage with you if I don't trust you. And what do we know? Trust rises as communication rises, it falls as communication falls. So let's take a look at what I mean by a cadence of communication. In a traditional world, every year we work with clients all around the world, and we work with them to develop an ongoing cadence of communication. We start at the biggest view every year and work it down to the daily. And it looks something like this. Every year we set the big picture. The big picture is always the same. Where are we headed? How are we going to get there? And what are we tracking to know when we're on and off track? Where are we headed? How are we going to get there? And what are we tracking to know when we're on and off track? Every quarter, we come back and review our strategic objectives. Here's where we said we were going to be, and here's where we said we were headed. Here's how we've ended up so far. And we communicate those results ideally to the whole organization. Every month, we review and communicate metrics. This is where we course correct. This is how we see where we're on track and off track and make those course corrections to get on track, and if we're ahead, to stay on ahead. Every week, we want to hold people accountable for specific actions towards deliverable outcomes which deliver our goals and objectives. And then every day, we focus on daily results. And for us as executives, that means, how did I show up as a leader today? So year in and year out, we work with organizations to develop this very predictable, reliable, dependable path of communication, cadence of communication. However, this is not a usual situation. It's a very unusual situation. As I mentioned, crisis and chaos. In those situations, we take this cadence of communication and we flip it upside down. We invert it. And all of a sudden, our focus gets very near term with moving out to the longer term. And it looks something like this. Every day, we focus on daily leadership and messaging. Every week, we still are holding people accountable for deliverables on goal. And all of a sudden, for most of us, cash flow, if it isn't already a big deal in your business, is now a major factor. So we're tracking cash on a weekly basis. And for us, we have a 13-week cash flow tool. The way that looks is we're projecting those 13 weeks, which is a quarter out. And then each week we're updating the actual against the projected. So we always have a running tally of what the upcoming cash flow looks like. Every month we're reviewing those metrics and communicating them, course correcting where needed and necessary. Every quarter, reviewing those strategic objectives and communicating to the organization, and team alignment becomes mission critical. All of these in service of our big picture. And we may have to redefine our big picture. Our where we're headed may have shifted. Our how we're going to get there, that may have changed also given today's environment. And certainly reminding our organization what we're tracking to know when we're on and off track is absolutely essential. Now, let me walk you through some of the tools that are available that you can use to accomplish this cadence of a communication. Every day, I want you to start your day asking yourself the same question. What message needs to be communicated today? What message needs to be communicated today? Now, I'm not insinuating that every day you'll have a message that the organization needs to hear or your team needs to hear, but I do want you to ask yourself that question every day. So I guess the more accurate way to ask it would be, what message, if any, needs to be communicated today? But I want you every day to think about this. Here's what I've found. People need to hear from us much more often than we believe is so. Now, sometimes that message may go to the whole organization. Sometimes it may go to your team. Sometimes a specific department. Sometimes a group of people who do a specific role for you. Doesn't mean that every day that is going to be an organizational message. Ask yourself who, when, what, and how I might provide a message today that would either get people more aligned or more engaged. Aligned means I'm reminding them where we're headed. Engaged, I'm raising that level of trust so that they'll put their time, energy, and efforts towards helping us accomplish that goal or objective. I want you to think about this every single day. A daily huddle meeting, this is just a quick meeting, no more than 15 minutes with a group of individuals. It could be an individual or in some cases the whole organization. Now look, when I bring all this up, you might be thinking maybe our company's too big to communicate every day. Not long ago, I was with a trucking company executive in Springfield, Missouri, and he was telling me how he used their voicemail system in their particular phone system to send out a voicemail that automatically goes to all the phone numbers they have on file for every single employee, and he does it every day. He says, it's how I start my day. I wake up, I construct that message, and I pick up my phone and send that message through our system. And I thought that was pretty amazing. He said, yeah, every day I'm thinking about what does someone in my organization need to hear today? And I said, just out of curiosity, how many people does that go to? He said 4,500. So 4,500 people get a message every day. In another instance, this is a company in South America. The CEO was so interested in changing the culture of their company. They happen to be a guard service. 80% of their employees worked overnight guarding properties or real estate. They weren't even on site. They were on somebody else's property in the middle of the night. He would wake up for months on every other day and make a call that everyone in the organization, every one of his guards heard from him in the middle of the night at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And his message was simply, I'm with you. I'm there with you. We haven't forgotten you. You're the important part of our business. Leadership assessment. At the end of every day, I want you to look back and ask yourself this question. Was I the kind of leader our organization needed today? Now look, this isn't a value judgment like beat yourself up if you weren't, because we all have days where we ebb and flow and we show up better or not as well as we would like. But it's a way to say, okay, what do I need to do more of, differently, or better the following day to really show up as the kind of leader our organization needs? And by the way, this applies to CEOs, and every manager in the organization can really ask themselves the same question. Was I the kind of leader we needed today? And if not, what do I need to do more of? Now, a simple leadership assessment that I've used for years is what I call the lead, manage, do assessment. I think for most of us, really, this is what we're looking at. And am I in a position of leadership? And generally speaking, I would say leadership is we set the direction, others figure out what to do to get us there. Or am I in a management role? Management is much more, I'm telling people where we're headed and I'm telling them what to do to get us there. It's much more directive. And then a doing role, and we all find ourselves in this role from time to time, is actually doing the work needed to get that goal or objective accomplished. And just at any given day, ask yourself, what percentage of my time fell into those categories? Now, I'm going to keep saying this, but some of these are particularly important in this remote environment we're finding ourselves in, and I think this one is. It's very easy to find ourselves in a doing role as we're a bit more isolated from our team than we may normally be. And making sure that you're spending sufficient time, especially now, in that leadership role. And what does a leader's message sound like? Where are we headed? How are we going to get there? And what are we tracking to know if we're on or off track, generally speaking, or on that specific goal or objective? Every week, review our KPIs in detail. Now, the way I did it, I assigned out one of my KPIs to every one of the people on my team. Everyone had something, some had more than one. And their role every week was to report in. Are we on track or off track? If we're on track, can we expect more of that? In other words, did we just get lucky, or are we trending down in the right direction? If we're off track, are we concerned about it? If we were concerned about it, then we would assemble a team to work on it, to address it, solve it ideally. We did not discuss it in that meeting, and by doing that, I was able to cover 20 KPIs in about 30 minutes. And then we had the right teams in the meetings to address, solve, or resolve those issues from the very start. 13-week cash flow tool. Every week, we would take a look at the cash flow. In my book, CEO Tools 2.0, one of the case study companies is a company called Barefoot Wine, one of the best-selling wine brands in the world. Interestingly, it started out in the laundry room of the two founders, which is just an amazing story. And they had a similar report. They called it their cliff report, like falling off a cliff. They wanted to know, if we don't get any more revenue coming in and we just have to live on our current cash flow, when will we run out? When will we fall off the cliff? Now, the 13-week cash flow tool gives us a little bit more than that, but it tells us if we project our cash flow over a quarter, and then we keep up with our actual receipts every week, we'll start to, and match that off with our lines of credit, we'll start to see, are we building cash or are we using cash? And I think in situations like this is vital information to know. Last is walk the four corners. W4C. This is a reminder in normal circumstances to get out of our office and actually engage the people in our organization who are doing the work for us. And I mean the ones who are really doing the work, making it happen. Well, in today's environment, that may not be available to us. If it is, then absolutely do it. If you're one of the businesses that's open and operating, particularly in a production or distribution environment, being out on those floors, face to face with your key people, making it happen is critical. If you're in a business like ours, where people have gone remote for the most part, then walk the four corners remotely. Make some specific calls to people on your team. Ask them questions. How are you doing? What do you see that we could be doing right now to improve either our production or our communication? What are you noticing? How could we make things better around here? See, people want to be part of that conversation. The interesting thing is when we start to ask people questions like that, it moves them from being valued for what they do to being valued for what they know. And when that shift occurs, people feel more valuable and trust rises. You'll start to see that a lot of what I'm describing is about increasing the levels of trust so that we get that engagement needed to accomplish the goals and objectives we've laid out. Oh, just a reminder, as you make those daily calls to people in your organization, be sure that you're expanding past your direct team. It's easy to think when we talk to the same few people often, remind yourself that's not the same as talking to a lot of different people. We tend to talk to our same team members over and over each day, each week, each month, but make sure you're stretching out. Talk to managers and people in the organization who don't necessarily report directly to you to ask those same questions. What could we be doing better? How are you doing? What do you see that I don't see that we can do to improve the organization? Every month, we want to review those metrics in detail. This is where we're course correcting. I think one of the biggest responsibilities of leadership is to course correct, to assess where we are relative to where we thought we would be, and then course correct. Now, you've heard me say this phrase a number of times. Where are we headed? How are we going to get there? And what are we tracking to know when we're on and off track? Now, you've probably picked it up, but I'm going to point out the obvious. When I'm saying that last part, what are we tracking to know when we're on and off track, I've never said if we're on and off track. I'm saying when we're on and off track, because we're always off track. We're a little ahead or a little behind. We're a lot ahead or we're a lot behind. The job of our biggest job as a leader is to course correct. If we're ahead, knowing what to do and directing people, getting in conversations about how to stay ahead. If we're behind, how do we get people back online to get us back as close to center as possible to course correct as quickly as we can? That's our role as a leader.
Jim,
Yes.
a question has come in from Heather that I think might be applicable right now, and so I'm just going to throw it out to you. So
Sure.
she's saying the remote, before COVID, reaching out to various areas or levels of your organization. How do you avoid trust issues when you go over the direct reporting levels if you've never done that before?
Great question, Heather. And by the way, I would say this exists remotely for sure, but this situation also exists when we're all physically together. And there's two things I would recommend, Heather and everyone. Is number one, be transparent. Let your team know first. I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to be reaching out to people in the organization. Here's my plan. This week I plan to talk to people at this level of the organization or in this part of the organization. I want to know more about what they see, how they might feed us back, what we could do better. Then I always assure each member of my team, if I hear anything about your leadership, your management, I will come to you first. Because I think that's what people are worried about when they get concerned, is that somehow they're going to get a complaint about their leadership, their management style, and somehow that'll be used against them. By the way, in my years of doing it, that was much more rare than people feared it would be. But I'm just very upfront about it. Hey, I want to do this. I want to know. When I wrote the book, Heather, one of the things that I found pretty interesting, I did a number of companies I call case study companies. I studied dozens of companies and featured 7 in the book. And one of the companies, I wanted to find out how large a company I could find who does all the same things I'm talking to you about today. And the largest I found was a company in the US called Danaher. Danaher is a $2 billion company, and they have about 26 different operating units, and they've built their whole business around feeding up ideas from the people doing the work to the supervisors that they work for. Those supervisors feed it up to managers, and managers deliver it to the senior team to turn it into best practices and even processes and systems that deliver reliable results. This is how they run their business, the whole business. In fact, the supervisors are required to ask every single person who works for them every week the same question. If our goal is for you to do your job better today than yesterday and better tomorrow than today, what would we have you do differently? What would we have you do more of, less of, or even stop doing? And that's what feeds their results. How well has it worked? They've beat the S&P 500 results 20 out of 20 years in a row. And I'm a big fan of the way Warren Buffett has managed businesses. I think he's gotten more value out of the businesses that he's owned than just about anybody else. They're one of only 5 companies in the world who have beat Berkshire Hathaway's and Warren Buffett's results 10 out of the last 10 years. And if you ask them why, it's these conversations. So I would set that context for your team. Hey, we're doing this because we've got to get better. Maybe we used to think we'd like to get better, but right now in this situation, we have to get better. We have to get better fast. And the people who are doing the work are the ones who have the answers to that. Thank you so much for asking that question. Every month, I recommend every CEO writes a leadership letter. This is a letter from you as the leader. By the way, if you're the manager or the head of a department or a team, you can do the same thing. It's a letter that goes out every month, and it simply says, here's how we did last month in the first paragraph. Second paragraph, recognizes someone who delivered great results for you. I call it the superstar paragraph. Third paragraph, recognizing and acknowledging someone who did something consistent with your core values, someone who reinforced that important culture that we all work to build and maintain. And then the last of the 4 paragraphs is simply, here's where we're headed next, either the next month or the next quarter, depending on the outcome. And in that one letter, I can align the whole organization, hold us accountable for what we said we were going to do last month and how we did, recognize a few people who have either contributed at a performance level or an alignment level, and then remind the organization where we're headed next. One-on-one coaching. I think it's our responsibility to help our people get better, maybe even push them to get better. See, this isn't about only working with people who are underperforming. In fact, I encourage everyone that I work with to start with your top performers. Tell them what they could do. Pick 3 things, just 3 areas, that if they improved in these 3 areas, their results wouldn't go up incrementally, they would go up exponentially. It would be a big improvement if they delivered better results in these 3 areas. Then there's a specific plan to follow and measurements and dates on which we'll track progress to make course corrections. The way I always say it is, look, there's not a professional athlete in the world who's at the top of their game who's not working with a coach to get even better. And that's the signal I want to send. This isn't about me being disappointed in their results, just the opposite. I'm so excited about what they've done so far, I want them to do even more. Let's talk about how to do that. And if that's the conversation I'm having with my team every month, they get better. Not only that, they begin to develop a mindset of, what do we do around here? We get better. Every quarter, we review those results and on a team basis using the quarterly priority manager. Everyone on your team sets their top 5 priorities in order of priority, and then they share them all with the rest of the team. I've never seen anything break down walls and barriers faster between teams, individuals, or departments than when they all start sharing their highest priorities. Here's what I learned. A couple of things. Number one, every single person working for you is absolutely certain they're the hardest working person working for you. They all believe it. They all think they're working harder than everybody else. And they automatically assume whatever their top priority is your top priority. But once they start hearing everyone report out, once everyone starts sharing their highest priorities, they start to realize everybody's busy. Everybody's got big priorities. When I started to do this, I noticed an interesting thing occur. My team was a high-performing team, but they moved from being a team of really high-performing individual contributors to a team of interdependent high performers. And that interdependence showed up like this. Instead of what do I need, they started to ask, what can we do? Wow, that's really big what your team is working on. What can we do to support you? How can we help? What can we do to make that work a little better, a little faster, a little easier? How can we do this together? And it became a really interesting phenomenon. We started to perform at such a higher level when we did that. The other thing is to deliver a strategic business review once a quarter with the whole organization. Here's where we said we were going to go. Here's how we're doing so far. Now, in this environment, I might even suggest that we do this every month. Over the next few months, you're doing this, but you still do it at the end of the quarter. It becomes a practice that we follow every quarter. And it sounds a lot like the letter. Here's what we said we were going to do. Here's how we've done so far. Here's what's working. Here are some places we have challenges. Here are a few people who've helped us along the way. Here are some new people who've joined the organization. Let's celebrate some people who've been around for a while. And this is all in service of our big picture plan for the year. Our strategy, where we're headed over the next few years, our tactics, what we intend to accomplish this year, our actions we'll take monthly, quarterly, and then our goals and our metrics that we'll track. The one thing I'm saying about plans today that I'll say to you today is make sure your plans are relevant given any changes that need to occur based on what we'll probably experience over the next 30 to 90 days. Nothing gets ignored faster than a plan that was built back in January based on projections that we thought we would see in a normal year. And now that we've hit this bump in the road, we don't adjust for that. People just start to ignore the whole plan. But the companies I'm seeing who are quickly going in now, making adjustments, reforecasting, resetting goals and outcomes if needed, definitely resetting actions that need to be taken to deliver outcomes that we thought we would see, are the ones who are seeing their plans stay relevant. And that's what's important. Plans should never be carved in stone. They're relevant. They change as conditions change. I'll ask her any questions that you want to send through to Ruth Ann about this cadence of communication before I shift to the next section.
And while we're waiting for people to weigh in, I really like what you said about creating interdependent high performers. And I think that's a delicate balance, because you have certain amounts of ego, people that want to be recognized, that they want to be climbing in the organization. How do you balance that out?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we hear the term silos all the time. I think silos is just another way to say highly effective, independent producers. That they're good at what they do. And as a result, they tend to build those walls that we call silos, exactly what you're saying. Sometimes it's ego based. Sometimes it's in the best interest of their team. Like they'll tell you it's not even their ego. It's just they want to hold on to those resources for their team because they love and support their team. And what I saw with the quarterly priorities is as these are shared around the room, those walls begin to break down. They start to realize that it's not about them and their team. It's about all of us, and we're all a part of delivering these big outcomes. Um, Part of it happens just when they start sharing, but there's something interesting. I knew this worked as I ran my team through this for many years. I knew it worked for a long time, Ruth Ann, but I didn't know why. And then at the end of last year, the Gallup organization, who's one of the world's leaders on studying goals and goal achievement, released their big 10-year-long study on goal achievement. And it revealed two really interesting things. Here's what it said. If I share a goal or objective with you right now, just because I say it out loud, and then I go off to do what I do and you go off to do what you do, Gallup found sharing a goal out loud with another person increased the likelihood of achieving it by 65%. 65% just because I shared it out loud. Well, that's happening as they go around the room and they're sharing out the priorities they intend to accomplish or focus on. But here's where it gets better. If you agree when I share it out loud to become my accountability partner, and we have regular conversations, and you ask me about what I've done so far, how that's working, you might make suggestions about what I could do next or what I'm doing, how I could do it differently. In other words, holding me accountable to take the actions and then make changes when needed. With an active accountability partner, Gallup said that likelihood of goal achievement goes up 95%. 95%. And this is what's happening as we share around the room. Number one, we're getting the 65% bump as soon as they share with each other what they want to accomplish. And then inevitably what happens is teams, individuals, and departments hold each other accountable for taking the actions required to actually make those things happen. So you get some of that accountability bump as well. So part of it's direct, like the fact that we're holding each other accountable, and number two, some of it's indirect, but the fact that they're sharing it out loud.
That's great information, and I love the evidence that, like you say, from Gallup, and it really plays back into your trust and communication rise and fall together, really strong.
Yes.
A question came in from Bernadette, and I think that she might not be alone on this one. She says, there is a lot here. Wow, how do I begin and how do I plan to execute this list? It's just a little bit overwhelming, Jim.
I'll tell you what, let me give you my email address, and it's jim.canfield@ceotools.com. I've got some of this stuff already built into nice electronic documents that will help you. You don't have to build it all from scratch, and I'm happy to send those to anyone who sends that in. If you didn't get my address, send a note to your chair or to Tech Canada, and I'm sure they can reach out to me and I'll get you that information. But I'll answer the question.
They can send it to me too. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great. To Ruth Ann also. Yeah, I would say start today. There's an old saying that I've heard attributed to Chinese culture that says, start where you are as you can start nowhere else. Start where you are as you can start nowhere else. And by that I mean, I'd start at the top with daily. Today, think about it. Is there a message today that the organization, a department, or a team could benefit from hearing from you about? Do your leadership assessment. You don't have to wait till the end of the day. Think about yesterday. How did you show up? Are any changes needed? Be planning for the next upcoming week. And on that weekly, I'd start with talking to someone in the organization that you haven't talked to in a while, or maybe you haven't talked to since this upset has occurred, and just reach out to them. See what you learn. See where that leads you. KPIs, I would say don't start with a page full, although I can send you the page to work on. Start with one financial result, one operational result, and one result that's related to either customers or people that you can start tracking immediately. that would give you an indication of whether things are moving in the right direction for you. And then I would think about the leadership letter. Is there a letter that would this letter be valuable for you to send? Because we're quickly rolling to the end of April, and to send this message out at the end of April would be a great start on your letter. And just commit to saying, hey, while we're in this situation that we're in today, I want to send out a letter on a monthly basis to let you know where we are. Maybe it's something you'll keep up forever. Maybe you'll just use it for the next few months, who knows? But that's how I would start.
That's great. Another question came in, and it kind of goes back again to something that you've touched on already, and maybe you'll go through this, is one of the things that when you're doing that monthly letter and you recognize individuals, how do you avoid creating issues in a larger organization because some people might never be recognized?
Yeah, this is a great question. In the beginning, you'll pick all the obvious superstars. And what I found is probably what you're describing. Superstars don't tend to be superstars occasionally, right? Those same names keep showing up. And what I would do is I would look for new and different ways to recognize people for what they do. And sometimes I stretched a bit. I remember once writing about we got a new salesperson and they got an order within their first 30 days. That almost never happened in our business. It usually took a few months to get up to speed. And I wanted to feature them in the letter. And one of my executives got very concerned about it. And he said, we don't even know if they're going to be successful or not. This is just their first order. It could have just been luck. And I said, who cares? They did it. And if I can use this to reset the paradigm that it takes months to get your first order, to say, I don't know if it'll ever happen again. I don't even know if Joe will be successful in the long term, but you know what? He did it this time. He got an order in the first 30 days. That tells us it can be done. Here's the interesting thing. 6 months later, it was routine that new salespeople got an order within the first 30 days because people started to think that it was possible. So sometimes you look for things to add into that superstar category. Now I'll mention one other thing. It's where I thought your question might have been going, and I get this question a lot when I speak. The question is, what do I do about the people who think they should have been recognized, but I didn't mention them? Who say, well, my results were as good as the person who was mentioned. Why didn't I get mentioned? And when I heard that stuff bubble up to me, I would reach out to the person directly. One of the things, you'll probably notice this, I didn't particularly have a flat organization, but I tried to I worked to flatten our communication structure. So I said, look, I'm always going to respect the chain of command inside our organization. And as far as I'm concerned, my communication doesn't necessarily follow a chain of command. I want to follow a communication pattern that says, I want and am able to talk to anybody, anywhere. Some people call it an open door policy. I forget about that. I'm not going to wait till somebody walks in my door. I'm going to reach out to their door, where their spot on the floor, and talk to them. As soon as I heard that someone thought they should have been mentioned, I would either reach out to them directly or would have their manager reach out and say, hey, I heard you thought you should have been mentioned. Tell us the story. What'd you do? What results did you get that we may have overlooked? Great. And I would include them if I could in an upcoming version of the letter.
I think you've answered Amrish's question. So if Jim didn't, I'll ask you to rephrase that. But you just touched on another point that's sort of come up from Terry about, the question is how to flow this through middle management. How do you get the supervisory people to be, like you say, to flatten out that communication within your structure?
Yeah, so at first I felt like all this fell on me. Like, I've got to find the superstars. I've got to find the people who are aligned. And then what I started to do is just, I got out of the business of telling people what to do and into the business of asking people questions. And it was like this. I would ask my direct reports, hey, who on your team should be recognized in our superstar or our values area of the letter? And they would ask their managers, who would then look for people on their team. But occasionally I would go to a manager specifically because I hadn't heard anyone from that particular part of the organization. Hey, who on your team? Who in your branch? Who in your area of responsibility could we feature? Is there anybody that you've seen? And sometimes they don't think of someone initially, but they'll come back to me later. Hey, you asked me last month about somebody for the letter and I didn't have anybody, but we just had something happen I wanted to share with you. See, I think if you want to change the culture of an organization or the results that you're getting, you change the questions that you're asking and the conversation that you're having. You want to change the culture of an organization or the results that you're getting. You change the questions that you're asking and the conversation that you're having. And this did that. All of a sudden, we were asking, where are the superstars? Where are the people who did something that was that activity that was aligned with our core values? And when I started to ask those questions, and that's the question that filtered through the organization, and then those people were recognized, it changed the dynamic of how our culture operated. We started to look for those things. Now, look, I'm going to be honest with you. In the first couple of months, when I first started doing it, it was a little bit hard to find those people because we hadn't started asking that question. 6 months later, it seemed like they were everywhere. In fact, I would say within a year, I was having to decide whether to add 2 people to each of those paragraphs because I was seeing so many examples of those things happening in the organization.
I'm going to take in a different direction here. We've got 2 questions that are a little bit different but have a very similar core. Heather and Adil have both written in, Heather's is about, the living document that you're writing on the 90 days. Targets are moving so quickly and people are not feeling like they can rely on data that's previous. So how do we target the message to make sure that it's timely? And Adil is about setting those KPIs. So, when we discuss a department KPI, how wide should that be? Or should it just be with the manager? So really it's about, the timeliness and the message, I think, at this point.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on that quickly, and then I want to move to the next section after that. I'm going to go to the KPIs first. I believe the KPIs are a cascade. So I want to have things that we track with some degree of frequency, like some are monthly, some are weekly, some are daily. Because if they're all daily, and particularly what I see too often is they're monthly. If they're all monthly, and I see too often they're monthly and they're financial, well, that tends to have a look back like a P&L does. This is how we did. I want to track those weekly and dailies so that it's giving me an early indication of how we're headed for that particular month. So this, again, it's all about course correction with the metrics. Are we on track? I think the other thing is I want to look at metrics, make sure we're covering the whole organization. So I want to look at financial metrics. I want to look at operational metrics. Operational metrics tell us if we're getting better at something or if we're doing it more efficiently with fewer resources. I want to look at people metrics. Are people happy and staying around? When we have an open spot, how long does it take to fill it? I want to look at customer metrics. Are customers happy and satisfied? Do they give us referrals? What's our retention of our customers? Is our average size of our order from a customer going up or down? How long does it take to acquire a customer? And then I want to look at a few metrics that are outside of our organization that gives us an early indicator where we might be headed. And if I've got a full gamut like that, then I can break it down. And you can probably see some of those are going to be tracked by lower, I don't mean lower like in a value judgment, but parts of the organization that are more in the trenches, and others will be tracked at a higher level. I think it's okay for a department to have metrics that are much more detailed than those that the whole executive team might track. I look at these like gauges that I might see on the dashboard of a car in the old days when we actually had gauges, or an airplane who has a number of gauges. Some we use only in an emergency, others we use constantly. Some tell us one thing specifically. And it's okay to have a variety of key indicators that tell us different things that we can use at different times. I'm going to move to the next section, Ruth Ann. This is about setting context. See, the other part of this communication, in addition to laying out the when we say it, is what are we speaking into? If you think about the word context, what is it saying? It's saying, what's the story? What's the narrative that gets created around the message we're delivering? And we must, as leaders, control that narrative. And I don't mean control like make people wrong. I mean control like if we don't say it, if we don't tell them, if we don't create the story, they will. And what I've noticed in the void of information, people rarely float to the positive. They usually sink to the negative. So inside of this, as we think about the situation we're in, I want you to think about a scenario planning tool. And here's what we're finding. A scenario planning tool can be used. It was originally created back in the 60s and 70s to look at a very complex, complicated situation or industry, and to boil it down to just 2 very fundamental characteristics, elements. Now, you may be thinking, Jim, our business is way too complicated to boil down to 2 elements. But in this case, this was created for the oil and gas industry. Some of you are probably in that industry. I mean, you know how complex it is. We got to find it. We got to get it out of the ground. We got to get it onto tankers. It's got to get to a refinery. It's got to be turned into gasoline and then sold at a retail store. Pretty complex business model. But in that industry, what they said is, hey, it's going to come down to 2 characteristics. The first was supply. Is that supply low or high? The second was price. Is that price low or high? Now, using this tool, what we do is we look at the scenario as it's represented by these 2 characteristics, and we don't argue about whether that will happen, when it will happen, or if it will happen. What we talk about is, if that situation is in place, what has to be true? What scenario do we find ourselves in? So for example, if price is high and supply is high, that's an unusual situation, because normally in a situation where supply is high, price drops. So this would be abnormal. If supply is high but prices are driven higher, it's normally by, or could be by, an external force like taxes, fees, tariffs. In a situation where price is low and supply is high, that's a pretty normal situation. Supply is high and readily available, and that's driving down price. If we look at the bottom left, both price and supply are low. This has to be a demand issue. Demand has dwindled. Maybe solar has taken off and it's so cheap that we're using it, and prices are dropping to stimulate demand. Then we've got a situation where prices are high and supply is low. Now, this was all the way back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, when gas prices in the US were about 25 cents a gallon. Supply was thought to be unlimited. And they said, well, the only way this scenario would occur is if an outside party of some kind was manipulating supply to drive up price. Well, lo and behold, 6 years later, along came OPEC. They withheld supply, prices skyrocketed. Now, what in this case, in each of these scenarios, we set specific strategies that we would employ if these situations occur. So they're all preset, and when the situation happens, they adopt that strategy. In this case, the company that was analyzing this was Royal Dutch Shell, and they became one of the biggest oil companies in the world by being prepared to deliver a specific strategy, which was to deliver their highest margin products, which were called specialty lubricants, if their supply dwindled. And they did that, and when other companies suffered, they bought those companies up and became one of the largest in the world. So let's use this tool to take a look at COVID-19. Because one of the things I'm seeing when I work with clients is, I had a client who said, I don't know whether I should be cutting expenses to the bone right now or whether I should be investing in the future. Well, that's a pretty diametrically opposed couple of decisions to make. And I said, well, let's look at it in terms of your customer base. And so in COVID-19, we're looking at the impact on the business and your customers. Are your customers still interested and able to buy from you? Is really what we're saying. Is it a low negative impact or a high negative impact? And the second thing we're looking at is, what's your timeline? Is this impacting you over the short term? And then we'll see what happens in the long term, or is this a long-term systemic problem, the way that it's impacting your customer base? When we started to look at it this way, here's what I found. Let's start in the upper left. Those who are having a low negative impact on their customer base, and that appears to be now and into the future, we're seeing that as a business model driven scenario. In other words, these are digital natives, people who have their businesses built online. Amazon would be a great large company example. They're online, they sell online, they deliver online. It's mainly virtual in the business they do until it gets delivered and processed and delivered to be sent to us. They've done well in this environment because we're home and we're still buying things. The others are digital platforms, like the one we're on, GoToMeeting or Zoom. You've probably read about the rise of Zoom during this scenario, because their product runs virtually, it runs online. And then last, those people who deliver essential products and services to us, grocery stores, drugstores, and all the people who supply them are all doing well because those products are in demand right now. Let's look at the opposite. Those that will suffer in the long term dramatically are what we describe as customer-driven scenarios. They had an impact in the short term, but in the long term, this could jeopardize their whole business. Gyms, salons, both hair and nails, elective surgeries, cosmetic procedures, day spas, they all require direct interaction with a customer or a client. And if things don't open up pretty quickly, if they were to be locked out for 6 months, my guess is a lot of these businesses won't even survive at all. We're also seeing professional service providers impacted in this way, especially smaller local ones who are used to meeting with their clients on a face-to-face basis, have seen an impact on their business. Let's look at the bottom left. Those companies who have seen a low impact on their business in the short term don't know the long term yet, but in the short term, it's kind of business as usual. Are construction companies. If they had a house or a building or a process inside of a factory under construction, it's likely to be continuing. We're seeing whole factories shut down in client companies, but the construction projects are going on. In fact, some are even increasing the construction and reconfiguration of facilities while they're shut down during this time. Landscaping. In areas that are available, like here in Arizona where I am, I've noticed landscaping companies are continuing to work. They don't require direct interaction with me to do the work that they do. And then remote programmers, people who build platforms. So any project or process related work seems to be moving on. Last, those who are impacted in the short term most dramatically, we're looking at that. I'm looking at that as companies who are infrastructure driven. So they built large facilities to serve a very specific purpose, oftentimes a single purpose. Hotels, solely built for us to spend the night, have meetings, maybe eat a meal or two. Car dealerships, large platforms built around the distribution of automobiles. And restaurants, with a model of having us come to visit to have a meal, have been incredibly impacted in the short term as people have been told not to even go to those places, and many of them are shut down. So let's take a look at the scenarios, the strategies these different scenarios might employ. So in the upper left, those who are in a business model driven scenario or are finding customers in a business model driven scenario, expand capacity quickly. You've got to be able to meet the needs of those customers as quickly as possible. And to do that, you probably need people. Be looking at industries outside of your own to hire and train those displaced workers. Now, also one of the strategies that's interesting here is normally in a high demand scenario, we would offer the idea of raising prices. But in a crisis situation, raising prices can be seen as gouging or taking advantage of those who are disadvantaged. So what we're recommending is hold prices steady, maybe even reduce them in a show of good faith, but offer premium options and make sure you've got good high margins built in those premiums. People feel good about the fact that you're protecting them with their base prices, and then let them choose some of those optional add-ons that bring your margin or your average sale price up, but the appearance is you've kept your prices steady. If you're in the customer-driven scenario or your customers find themselves there, they're gonna have to establish virtual options quickly. And this is a huge and, like caps and bold letter and maintain margins. One of the things we're seeing with all the customer-driven scenarios is people are quickly working to adapt their business into an online platform, and they're ignoring margins. And they end up doing something that can be the death knell for a business. They trade analog dollars for digital dimes. They trade analog dollars for digital dimes. In other words, a yoga studio that I was working with charges $20 to $25 per person to come to an actual physical class. And they're limited to about 15 people in that studio. What they found when they went virtual, and they did it really quickly without thinking about this, is all of a sudden they were only able, because of the market demand, to charge $5 or $10 per class, but they hadn't shifted their price and cost structure. So all of a sudden they were charging less, but they still had the same cost of instructor and everything else. And they were still thinking about 15 people in a class instead of thinking 100, 200, maybe 1,000 people in a class, because they were no longer constrained by the physical of a studio. Also making sure that as you transfer to a digital environment or a virtual environment, that you're beginning to capture lots and lots of data from your customers. For whatever reason, with face-to-face business models, professional, personal business models, I don't think we ask very often, what can we do better? What do you like? What services other services should we be offering? In a digital environment, people are used to giving you that kind of information. Bottom left, process-driven scenario, pre-book next jobs, making sure that you're practicing social distancing and stagger jobs for completion rates and dates. And in the infrastructure-driven, you got to repurpose some of those facilities. We're seeing hotels develop into medical facilities. We're rethinking how to use that space. Sometimes you need to reposition a business model. We've seen restaurants go from the model where the distribution model used to be, we went to them, they fed us, and we went home. Now the model is shifting to, they make the food and bring it to us. The only thing I would remind you here is if you're in one of these kinds of businesses, we worked with a restaurant who's a 4-star restaurant. And just a reminder that delivery takes away some of the price advantage that you had. You had a really nice experience that people had when they came to that restaurant. And that can work for many of us philosophically. They have an experience coming to you. But in delivery, that experience gets leveled out. So if you produce a really great high-end product that normally garners a much higher price, but it's served in the same styrofoam container that a lower priced restaurant might serve, you might start to see a blocking of wanting to pay more for that same experience. One of the recommendations we had for a high-end restaurant was to include candles and an extra dessert and some other things, better high quality silver flatware in the packaging that was delivered to make sure that they're maintaining that image. And a business model shift is a great example is car dealerships. They used to sell cars, and oh, by the way, if something breaks, we'll service it. The service was a secondary offering to the sale. Now it's flip-flopped. The service areas are open, so they have to provide a really high level of service at that part of the business, hoping that one day when people come back to buy a car, they'll remember them. So what we do is we just recommend each client goes through and said, if we're in this scenario, how can we best respond to these customer needs? How can we ensure in the left a reliable distribution model, making sure they can get the product when they need it? In the upper right, we want to ensure a profitable model, making sure that we're supporting that business and driving higher levels of margin. In the lower left, we want to ensure sufficient collections, watching those businesses to make sure their businesses don't trail off. And last, how can we facilitate the needed change for those people who are really making big shifts in their business model? Now, in all of these, you'll see the last question is always the same. Ask yourself, what do we need to do to protect ourselves in this particular scenario? As those businesses change, they won't all survive. And cash is what I would be watching in that scenario. I'm going to end on this note. Communication as compassion. And it boils down to this. As you've got people who are struggling personally, professionally, they're feeling isolated, somewhat lonely, they're asking themselves, is anybody really paying attention? You know, I'm out here. I want you to remind yourself about 3 ways to communicate compassion: rewards, recognition, and appreciation. Rewards, recognition, and appreciation. Now, it sounds a bit like I'm saying the same thing 3 different ways, but they're each a bit unique. With appreciation, it's an expression of gratitude. It's a thanks. People want to hear this right now. They want to hear that the contribution that they're making or have made to you in the past means something. In rewards, it's usually tangible. Most often it's valuable, like cash, money. But non-cash compensation actually works better. It has a longer experience, a longer shelf life, if you will, of how long it impacts people and how long they feel good about it. And last is recognition. Recognition often has something tangible, but it's just not very valuable. In other words, something that you can send or give to someone could be a gift card. It could be sometimes it's just a plaque or a reward of some kind that just says, we noticed you did something well, and it means something to them when they receive it. One of the questions that every employee wants to know is, how am I doing? How am I doing around here? And if we can send these messages, a quick email, a handwritten note, a small token of our appreciation, to those people who are going above and beyond right now, who might be feeling uncertain and unsteady about how they're being perceived in the organization, can go a long, long way. And it's the way we tie all this together. It makes us feel more valuable. I'll end on this last note. The people we work with and for us are committing more of their life to us than the people they say they love the most in the world, their friends and family. You measure the number of hours they're with us. If you factor out sleep, it's not even a comparison between how much time they give us and how much time they give them. And sometimes they're wondering, does anybody care? Does any of this matter? Does it even mean anything? And when I hear big picture questions like that, I'm reminded of a book I particularly like, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It's written about his experiences during World War II in the concentration camps. And he said when we heard people asking questions like that, questioning the meaning of life, we could see it in their eyes. They'd lost hope. And once they'd lost hope, they'd be gone in a day or a week or so. Sometimes the best tool you have at your disposal is to instill hope in the people that work with and for you. Tell them you care that they work for you, that the work that they do matters, and that it means something. It means something to you, to your customers, to the other people who work in the organization, for some of you, even the world, depending on what you're working on. I hope something I've been able to share with you this morning will make a difference for you. I'm open to any questions that you have, and thank you so much for having me this morning, Ruth Ann.
Jim, that was very powerful, and I love that you ended on purpose and accomplishment, and that's the big human driver there. I'm going to speak directly to anybody here who is a tech member that Jim has packed a lot in here in about 45 minutes time, and Jim is available to be booked into your tech meetings and can go into a deeper dive on this with your group and really expand on these topics and go into a lot of these strategies in more depth. So I do highly recommend to any of you who are tech members, and I know there's several chairs on board too, that if you haven't had Jim, or even if you have had him, to rethink about maybe you can put him into your program again in the upcoming days. Jim, everything that's just coming in right now is there's a couple of specific questions, but most of them are acknowledgments for all the impact that you have given them, the richness of the knowledge and the tools, and we look forward to you sharing those tools with us. And if you have a slide that has your email on it, that would be great. And if you don't, then people can contact me directly. There it is. So it's JimCanfiled at ceotools.com. So just make sure you've written that down, or you can contact me here at Tech Canada. I'll also be asking Jim to maybe send us a few of those tools so that we could attach them to the recording.
Great, thank you.
We'll flip to the next slide. I just wanted everyone to know that Jim's session has been recorded, and with his permission, I'll add those CEO tools and his tool sheets to that as a package, so that you can go through this a little bit more with your company or with your team to be able to strategize and move forward. And I loved what you said. You can only start where you are right now, and that's a great place to begin. So please join us for up and coming webinars and spread the word. We've got some really good and valuable content coming up. So thank you again, Jim, and to everyone who joined us. Have a great day.
Thank you.